If you know a thing or two about red light therapy, but you still get confused around optimal irradiance, whether you should use wavelengths outside of the 660 and 850 nanometer range, how often you should use red light therapy, and also what the pros do, what the leading experts, how they use red light therapy, then you're gonna love this video. Not only that, but at the end of this video, I share some news that fans of red light therapy are gonna love, so be sure to stay around for that. So today I sit down with James Carroll. He is the CEO and founder of THOR Photomedicine. Now when it comes to photobiomodulation, or red light therapy as we like to call it, James knows his stuff. He's been in the industry for over 30 years, he has written numerous papers on the topic, provided hundreds if not thousands of presentations. He runs a highly regarded course on photobiomodulation and also runs alongside some of the world's leading medical centers and universities researching this topic. If that's not enough credibility for you, his products and research is used by the US Special Forces, he collaborates with Harvard Medical School, and his products are used by some of the world's elite. Now, I traveled to London to get the opportunity to chat to James. He is regarded as one of the go-to guys when you want to learn more about red light therapy. So I was honored to get the opportunity to ask him some questions on camera about dosing, pulsing, wavelengths, irradiance, and like I said earlier, how he personally uses red light therapy. I also need to point out that what was intended to be a 30-minute chat went for well over an hour. We cover a lot here. Now, some of the content we talk about may not interest you, so feel free to use the chapter buttons below to jump ahead to the section that does interest you. And I also need to mention, this was my first time ever doing a face-to-face live recording, so please bear with me. It may not be the most polished production I've produced, but it's only gonna get better from here. Okay, so before we get into the chat, I do need to share a quick disclaimer. This presentation is intended to provide education on the background and state of the art of photobiomodulation. All references to photobiomodulation and its potential applications are for an educational purpose only. James and myself are not doctors, so any information presented in this video should not be taken as medical advice. All right, so firstly, thank you for taking the time today. I'm really excited to unpack some of the stuff on red light therapy, and let's start with an easy one. Can you do a definition or a bit of an overview of what exactly red light therapy is, or photobiomodulation, I should more accurately say?
Funny you should say that. I was at a World Federation for Laser Dentistry conference in Poland a few weeks ago, and they were asking things, not exactly your question, but they were asking something about how it works as well. And the panel could not agree. I was on a panel session, and eventually I came up with about, 15 words that summed up what photobiomodulation is in terms of how it works. I think I'll give the short. I have several versions for people. You've seen my Star Trek story.
I have. It was very good.
For the sake of your audience, in case they haven't seen it before, photobiomodulation is something that you, if you're old enough, or if you're not old enough, it's a TV show that your grandparents used to watch. Seriously, because
I don't know.
In the 70s, you know, I'm old enough to be a grandparent, so it could easily be true. I could have a grandchild. And so on Star Trek, when somebody was injured, they would get taken to sick bay. The doctor would get out a laser beam, aim the laser at the injury, and the injury would heal instantly. That is photobiomodulation. But it's not as fast as on TV. You get the idea. We shine light on people and they heal more quickly. So that's what photobiomodulation is for me, if you've seen the Star Trek videos. The short introduction to it says basically it increases energy, reduces oxidative stress, which means it reduces inflammation. But there's a lot more to it than that. So it's regenerative. It does skin, muscle, tendon, bone, nerves, regenerative. It's anti-inflammatory. It reduces edema as well. And it can be analgesic. It has an effect on blood flow too. Probably the same mechanism as its ability to reduce edema as well. And now we know that it seems to have effects on the mobilization of stem cells and activation of stem cells, so tissue-resident stem cells. So now that's an awful lot to be claiming for one technology. As I often say, you should never believe anything that appears to do everything. But it doesn't do everything. There seems to be some common mechanisms between everything I've just said, and a major one is the production of reactive oxygen species. So too many reactive oxygen species for too long will overwhelm the body's natural antioxidant mechanisms leading to something that doctors call oxidative stress, and what most patients will call free radicals. So it's very good at keeping those in check. And that has, once you've solved that and inflammation is going down, well, tissue repair starts off, possibly naturally by being in a better environment with better blood flow. And we do actually directly seem to activate the mechanisms that start tissue regeneration. Now it's still reactive oxygen species. You see, you make ROS that stimulate as TGF-beta-1, which tells stem cells when to differentiate, and then they go off and make new tissue. So it's still back to ROS. I think ROS is the major thing, and it causes a spike in it, which seems to activate all these downstream pathways. I don't know if your audience loves this kind of stuff. They love this kind of thing up. It can get very hairy.
They love it.
Yes, ROS and reactive nitrogen species could be the underlying cause of it all. But I actually have a definition, if you want to hear it,
yes, please.
that I gave in Poland, which I'm just going to look up. Photobiomodulation is light interaction with endogenous chromophores. So chromophores are light receptive elements. Endogenous means they're the ones we have naturally in our body, as opposed to exogenous chromophores. Perhaps you might have heard of photodynamic therapy, where you apply a dye to absorb the light and cause some effects. But endogenous are built-in ones. So light interaction with endogenous chromophores and tissues. The chromophores are in the tissues at a dose producing non-thermal, non-cytotoxic, non-ionizing therapeutic effects.
That's pretty good.
And what PBM is not, it's not blue light therapies which have cytotoxic effects or any other way they can cause this. So killing things is not part of photobiomodulation. That's something else. It is about these regenerative effects of these. If you like, all the positive effects of light is photobiomodulation. If we are killing things, that's not good. I know when you get very high doses of photobiomodulation, you can slow things down. You can have inhibitory effects from photobiomodulation. So you can stimulate, it can inhibit, but that's a different word from cytotoxic. We are not literally blowing up cells with a high intensity light or high photon energy, blue light, and the lower, shorter wavelengths of higher energy photons, and they kill things. So non-cytotoxic. You better ask another question, otherwise I'll just speak for a week.
What about then, I'm going off script here, what about things like your UV rays for vitamin D? Is that?
I think if the irradiance is low enough, then yes, it would be. It would be.
So your key factor here is if it's helping the cell.
Yeah.
Plus it is photobiomodulation.
Yes. And my academic friends wouldn't like that as a statement if it's helping, because it's a little bit too woolly and whatever it is. But ultimately, it comes out if we're stimulating things, we're not killing things. Then yes, and we're talking about the normal the cells in our body.
It's cool. I like it, and that's interesting about the blue light. I've never thought of that. How did you end up in the space? How do you know all this stuff?
1987. I was given consultancy to what we'd now call a photobiomodulation company. Low-level laser therapy, as we called it back then. Actually, even before that, we were just calling it low-power laser therapy at the time. And they took me to a conference in London at Guy's Hospital, where one of the four main editors of Gray's Anatomy was lecturing. And by Gray's Anatomy, I mean the medical book, not the TV show.
For sure.
It was inspiring, awe-inspiring, and it just seemed obvious to me. She was demonstrating healing of wounds in small animals. She's a scientist, that's what she does. But there were others. So there was the two sons of Andre Mester, who discovered this effect anyway back in 1967. But his two sons, Andre and Andrew, one's Andrew, the other was something. And they were showing these clinical results that we're getting back in Hungary, in Budapest. And I thought, this is going to be in every corner of every department of every hospital within 5 years. How could it not be? I had no idea how hard medicine was at that time. And so I gave up my work to go and work for that company. They went out of business. I started my first version of THOR with two engineers who were from the previous company in 1991. We were immediately sued by the company that I was helping raise money get some grant money from the assets of the company was purchased by somebody, and they immediately thought that I was ripping them off in some way. They sued me for what they call passing off, which is pretending to be them, as infringing copyright, which was the software they had in their device, and what was the other one? Infringing a patent. We won on all 3 counts. Their patent was invalid. The software they never paid for, and the software guy who did the development actually came and worked for us, and we paid him. So they didn't own the software, and they didn't own the patent. The patent was, there was prior art, and no, we were passing on.
So that company is still running. That's your company today.
So we had to close that business because that business could not afford to pay the bills of the lawyers. It's a fledgling business. So, but they sued us personally, my wife and I, as well as the company. So I had to become a near bankrupt so I was then eligible for something called legal aid. And so we were fighting, going over what's called a litigant in person at the High Court in London for some time, and got to a point where we finally were poor enough to get legal aid, and we spent everything you got defending yourself. As soon as we got legal aid and went back to court and said, right, we've got legal aid now, we can get proper support for this thing. And they immediately said, okay, we'll walk away from this, if you will.
Oh my God.
So that's how it started. So we restarted our second THOR in 1992. Yeah. And then there was, I went to the States. Do you shows normally run for 4 or 5 hours?
I'm worried more about the battery life. No, I've got spare batteries. But
you did ask, and that is, the United States Navy had purchased some of our products to do research on spinal cord injuries. Well, this is then like 10 years later. I went over to a conference, saw their work being presented. I saw other people working on the brain, working on the heart, as well as our work on the spinal cord, as well as wound healing, musculoskeletal pain, that kind of thing. And I came back from that conference and said to my partners in the business at the time, hey, we need to write a plan, raise some money, because this is going to be huge. This is not just healing up a few wounds. This is not a bit of muscle and joint pain. These are the brain, the eye, the spinal cord, and the heart. And so they said, nope, don't do that. If you go to venture capitalists, they'll take over the company, they'll fire everybody, we'll be bankrupt within 18 months or something. I said, okay, I can't stand by and watch us be overtaken by big pharma or something, getting into the industry and going off to do it by myself. And 2 weeks later, they said, come back, we'll do it your way, wrote the plan, raised the money, and we were bankrupt 18 months later. Because they put their own CEO into the company with the money. They fired anybody who's ever good. Everything my business partners feared absolutely came true. I hope they're listening, and I think they know that they were right and I was wrong. But I bought the assets back in 2007. I already started again on 1st of January 2008 by myself. It is easier to run a business as a dictator. Yeah. It's gone very well, actually.
Your 2 key product lines, you have your NovoTHOR bed or your pod, and then you have your handheld devices. Is that what you call it? What are the key differences? Obviously size, but at the end of the day, they're doing exactly the same thing. Just one's on a larger area and one's on a smaller.
Yes. So the wavelengths are the same. We used to make 10 in the lasers, 50 on the LEDs of the desktop system, but NovoTHOR, the 616, 850 nanometers, it's done very well for us. We got a lot invested in that, so all the research papers published will be using those wavelengths, and we don't see a reason to change with that at the moment. The irradiances, so the intensity of the light can be, depending on what we do, our handbag has got more potential power.
Does it?
For those. So 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared for the NovoTHOR. Our handheld LED systems are 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared, but we go up to, with our lasers, up to 5,000 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So, but that's when we get analgesia or anesthesia. Yeah. So we can actually generate an anesthesia or anesthetic effect.
So let's say I sprain my knee surgery. My physio has your pod, your bed in there. from a treatment point of view, is there any need for me to go a few miles down the road to a clinic that's got the handheld setup?
No, no. If it were, depends. If you started developing sort of myofascial trigger points, I'm not sure that our NovoTHOR will get rid of those. So myofascial pain responds well to that laser treatment. You certainly get a faster, more analgesic effect when we use the lasers. We're much more targeted with the lasers and the handheld system generally. So if you'd had sprained your knee, is that the example you gave? If it's acute, then probably, traumatic, you may not have trigger points at that point, get that lymphatic system going, get the blood flow going, you've got the light for helping regenerate the tissue. I think an acute thing, probably not. Certainly if you get on it early, no problem. But if you've got myofascial pain as a result, if you want more of that, any chronic sort of neuropathic components, you can get something called central sensitization, right? And in some conditions, then you'll be better off with the lasers.
You mentioned 660 and 850, and you said you're happy with those. Does that mean there's no benefit to other wavelengths?
No.
Does that mean then, in an ideal world, money, resources aren't a limiting factor, that your NovoTHOR would have multiple wavelengths in it other than those two?
I doubt it. I think the spectral width of the LEDs are relatively broad, as you've seen in your spectrometer there, and it's not clear these days. The more you know about the mechanism, the less you are certain about anything in this field. Do you know, I have, I don't know if it's confidential, so I'll just say, with scientists who have extraordinary instruments, and they have methods of seeing where in mitochondria a photon might go and get absorbed, and they cannot confirm the Cytochrome-C-Oxidase story.
Really? True.
It seems that in principle, near-infrared light, it could be that, it's the water. And see, as soon as I say something, I can hear my other voice going, yes, but. Infrared light should be working on cell membranes and changing membrane permeability for calcium ions. That's been demonstrated. Seems that what I can't see from looking at the early work, it's not clear to me that red and near-infrared light actually have any profoundly different mechanisms. If you do, you will find studies that shows a red light better than near-infrared, or the other way around, or mechanistically different. There's a fundamental flaw in pretty much every piece of work I've ever seen comparing one wavelength with another. Yeah. They do not have the same power. Yeah. They do not have the same beam area, same profile. And what you've seen people doing is saying things like, and we put this many joules per centimeter squared in, without properly defining, power divided by area, that's by time, that's the joules per centimeter squared. But if you don't have all three of those identical, you don't know which is causing the difference that you think you're finding. And I have not seen anybody do a satisfactory study to really compare wavelengths.
Very interesting. And there's a lot to unpack there. I know I get asked a lot, like, from a dosing point of view, how should you dose? And I saw this study and they did this. And it's like, like you mentioned, okay, what are these other variables? How far away from the light were they? Some of them are contact, some of them are 6 inches. It's so, yes, there's a lot of science out there, a lot of research out there, but it doesn't answer all the questions that we're often asking. The Cytochrome-C-Oxidase point you made there, because one of my questions was, what about these other wavelengths we're seeing, up around the 900s, the 1000s, 810, for instance. My question was going to be, do you think they don't matter because it's all about optimizing the light for the Cytochrome-C-Oxidase? So I'm still going to ask that because I'm curious.
You can. So there's all these other sort of caveats involved. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about oxygen consumption. And then I'm going to talk about how far that penetrates in systemic effects. So if I can come back to oxygen and systemic effects and indirect effects, there was a third point I wanted to get in. I wanted to say, for your previous, as we finish out your previous paragraph, or whatever we call it, I do not believe any parameters I read in any research, unless I perhaps know the scientists behind it, and if I know they've got a physics nerd in there, then we might agree. But most of them do not. I can tell you there are people who still believe that the size of the aperture is the size of the beam. It isn't. There might be a freak case where it is, but really not. And I know from plenty of studies that looked and measured the power of devices that we use in studies, and it's quite clear that manufacturers are not making what they say they make, or the devices are wearing out or something. And that these people are not testing these beams themselves for getting a proper physicist to do it. So I don't actually believe anything. If I'm absolute, I believe the outcome, but I don't believe the dose, I don't believe the parameters.
I just want to add a comment here, because I'm actually working on a video. I've started doing some notes, and it's going to be on that exact topic, why I don't trust the science in red light therapy. And this is what we use to support our claims in there, right? And the reasons are, like, you touched on them. I have tested some devices that have been used in the literature, and it's very different. Not like 5% different, but very different. I've also spoken to some labs that have been referenced in some of their science papers, and they've tested larger devices. And I asked them how they're doing the measurements, because I want to know, I want to make sure I'm doing similar measurements. And they were just taking snapshot readings. But there was like an array, for instance, they were using, and it was like quite I don't know, 3 inches out. But you know, when you're playing around with your spectrometer, your irradiance meter here, you're seeing variability in light. And like you said, I've also seen things where, they are making that assumption that it's the size of the device is the amount of light that's hitting the body. So all of these issues. I then have a question then. If you were to send a product off to a university and they're going to do some research on it, do they just use the specs that you're telling them on your product?
Well, my product, I mean, obviously, I'm an enthusiast for this stuff. So I think, but I mean, most researchers are not testing the beams. So I'm a co-author of a paper called The Dark Art of Light Measurement.
Really?
So it's worth looking at. It is the dark art. No, is it the dark art of low-level light therapy? There's the dark art of low-level light therapy. Yeah, that is it. It is, and I tell you, I'm involved in some beam measurement experiments at the moment. We've discovered that with LEDs, we've got spectrophotometer. It's a $27,000 machine to do this thing. It's on a fiber optic cable, so advantage is that we don't interfere with the source of the light.
Cool.
Particularly when we talk about inside a device like a NovoTHOR.
Yes, of course.
What have we learned? So if you put the light source on the aperture, the window, or the light's coming through, the results are not what you expect. And what we do know now is that the further away you go, when I say the light, the more accurate, what you can do is you can measure from the distance. If you hold it at 5, 10, 15 centimeters, you get 3 data points. Inverse square law, you can actually calculate what it should be back at that at the source, and you get a different number. So it's really weird, and it's not as straightforward as you'd think. And I wasn't, we were looking at something before we started the recording. Held above surface. So this is our NovoTHOR, and because we've got it recorded, and it's so it's held above surface. So what we've got here, 5 centimeters above it, 31 milliwatts per centimeter squared, 20. Now, if you hold it double the distance, you would have thought the power would go down a lot. It's gone down from 30, whatever it was, I said, to 27.6. It's not dropped much, and lifted up more, and 30 centimeters away, that much away, it's only dropped to 26. So now, why is that? The reason is because it's flooded with light. It's light everywhere, and so that's the reason people expect the low power to go away. They said, well, I'm lying on my back. It might get my back getting more light than my tummy. Maybe, but if so, not by much. Non-significant kind of thing. So, and by the way, where you've got the canopy open or closed, I'm going to go through it all now, aren't I? That's 45 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So doing a measurement with it closed, it took off 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared up to 45. This is a really funny business to be in.
That's bizarre, and you have no idea why that...
Oh, I know what it is, because the top is coming and reflecting off the surface of the other thing. See, there's that one there. So, I've done measurements of my forehead. I think. So, and I'm going to give you the whole slide.
Yeah, please do.
And you can walk through this stuff and discussion and conclusions on this thing. Comparing it with other light beds as well. Oh, so this is pretty
Yeah, this was something I wanted to ask about, how yours compares to the product straight out of China for 30, 40 grand. So
right. This is just me measuring on different parts of my body, just the same, to see what goes on. 29, it's close to the 30 on my forehead. 33, it's gone up by putting the light on my chest. So answering the question, how is this light on my coming down from the top of the canopy to my chest? Is it therefore much less than on my back? No, it's gone up to 33. Okay, 33.9 on my stomach there. And then we did some measures on the surface. 31.7 is measuring on the surface. Yeah. So now we've got, by the way, quite a diffusing surface on our bed. So I'm trying to flatten the light out as much as I have no hot. Yeah, cool. Now, when we see it, the camera tends to focus on the source of the light, and you don't get a what's in it. If you can get the NovoTHOR at the right angle, and you see what's actually happening on the diffuser level, which is really the skin level of it. Yeah. Compared with other beds here, so LightStim promoted at 60 milliwatts per centimeter squared, and then where we did a measurement for it, where you're going to see it in a chart in a moment, Theralight claims 100 to 129 milliwatts per centimeter squared. The reality is 8 milliwatts per centimeter squared for Theralight. And they advertise 100 to 129, depending which page of their website you're on.
Do they use a solar meter for testing?
I don't know.
Even though with a solar meter, that's a long way off, isn't it?
So this is why I feel for your people.
No, that's correct.
And thank goodness you've got this, because you might be the only sort of citizen scientist in PBM who's actually going to get. They have an organisation in the States. I forgot what it's called. By the way, there's a citizen something thing. Who in the UK we have a company called which tests products. Yeah, that's what they
right. Okay,
and they report which is the best washing machine and things like that. Yeah. And they're pretty different paces.
Yeah.
And the world needs somebody in PBM to do this.
For that, looking at some of those numbers you saw before, I had a device sent to me, a panel sent to me, and they sent it off to get it independently tested through a lab. This lab data came to me. The 6-inch rating was lower than the 12-inch rating.
All right.
And this has come from a lab. And this happened earlier this year. And that's what started me, that's what led me to start questioning some of this stuff. Because how does that happen from a lab testing? And it turns out they just snapshot it. Snapshot reading, 1 point, move back 1 point. Now testing a panel like that, of course, it's alternating red, near infrared, red, near infrared. They were just testing near infrared for this particular reading. So at 6 inches, they weren't quite over the LED, the near infrared LED. As they came back, they obviously were, hence the rating went up. But those numbers are lab numbers. So then they're published on the manufacturer's website because we've got lab numbers. So no one's at fault here. I don't say this to, I don't want to attack people or belittle people. It's just such a complex.
It gets much harder.
I can imagine. So I hope you're enjoying this video. James knows his stuff, huh? Now, please sure to hit like if you're enjoying this video. And while you're down there, hit subscribe as well. I actually have a lot more interviews coming out with some of the world's best red light therapy experts. So hit subscribe and you'll be the first to know about those videos when they go live. Let's quickly go back to that Cytochrome-C-Oxidase.
Yes, I said they're going to do something. Why? So first of all, I think there's all that work by people like Tina Carew. They measure action spectra. They measure absorption spectra. And I look at work done by Sername Kuka, based in Essex, UK. He's on the PBM world. He's got some other interests in cytochrome-C-Oxidase. And seems quite clear to me, there's a lot of people do say that it does fall red, and there seems to be a peak around 590. 590 nanometers is, and is well absorbed in the green. The limitation that if you want your light to get, if you believe, and I say there's a question mark over it because there's still a question mark in my head. I'm uncertain of everything in PBM now. As they say, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, or the less certain I am about everything. But if you believe you have to reach the target, then green light and yellow light's not going to get there. Right. Very superficial wounds.
Yeah.
So it's got to be red. It's got to be near infrared light. Oh, I've got a picture to show you. We know that red light doesn't penetrate more than maybe 5 or 10 millimeters usually. What do you make of that?
Yeah, right.
It's basically the light's going all the way down, it looks like a skin. Maybe it's down to what we call the vestibule. So the inside of my cheeks where they join the thing when it connects up there. So that's step round to the vestibules, always from my cheek up to right up to my eyelids. Red light doesn't go that far. Or does it? Because how can you ignore that? I was startled when I saw it. This is my explanation for it. So, and it really first of all, my original explanation for what's going on here is that I'm in a dark room. The camera's really sensitive. Therefore, it's picking up the few photons that get as high as my eyes,
right,
and way below and down around here. That must be it. And then I was having a bit of a debate with the University of Texas on different wavelengths, and he showed me some penetration studies, and they measured light. Oh no, it wasn't. It was using something called Monte Carlo modeling. It's a well-known, well-tested mathematical way of saying what wavelengths will travel through what tissues and how what you can expect light to do inside the body in terms of propagation of light. Monte Carlo modeling. And they Monte Carlo modeled, I think they did a thigh or something like that. It's pretty sure it was a thigh muscle. Anyway, a muscle. And they showed that sure enough, but here's the first surprise for everybody who's not heard this before. I was startled the first time I discovered it, or I was shown, it was demonstrated for me that in the near-infrared spectrum, 850 nanometers, so I was involved in these experiments, that 63% of the light never got past my skin. It bounced straight off. The reflection is massive. Now, the reason your camera can see us today is light's bouncing off us, okay? That's how much we reflect. The visible spectrum, it's going to be more than 63%. So if you're trying to get light to penetrate, your first problem is getting it into the body, let alone how far will it penetrate beyond the stratocorneum tissue, and then it goes, and it hits tissue. There's adipose tissue, scatters a lot, and so Monte Carlo modeling tell you how much, which the dermis, the epidermis, the
fat,
and the fat causes a lot of scattering.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it shows how it goes to muscle. And I was looking through all these different wavelengths they tested. One of the best penetrating wavelengths was red light.
Yeah.
Better than 1064, where they were testing, which is daily, by the way, 1170. It's on the way, probably similar to the spectrum. So 1064 is a known good, well-penetrating wavelength. So why is that? That just tells me that red light is highly reflected on the skin, but when it's actually in the body, it penetrates well, as shown here. Red light penetrates well in the body. What's happening here? Normally, if red light hits my skin, it bounces off and disappears into space.
Yeah.
This is our light-emitting lollipop. It's got a mixture of red and near-infrared light. I put it in my mouth. It's completely sealed by my lips with this lollipop of light, squirting light inside my head. That red photon goes up, let's say about, I'm going to call it 70% reflection. Could be more, could be 80%. Something like that. Red light reflects off skin around that amount. Two things. A, it's not bouncing off and going to space. It's going back into another part of my mouth. Those photons cannot get out of my mouth any other way apart from going through my cheeks, unless there's some absorption in the materials, in which case it gets absorbed and create heat. But they're quite reflective materials. Yeah. So very few photons are being lost. They're not bouncing into space. And they stay inside my mouth until eventually they get out. So if you like, I'm getting towards 100% penetration. All the reflection, it's an echo chamber of light in there. And now it turns out, actually, red light is a good penetrator, according to this Monte Carlo modeling I've been looking at. So everything I knew about red light and penetration is wrong.
So why not, knowing this then, are you not better to then sell this lollipop? Which, by the way, 2 years ago, I did an interview with someone who had a dentistry background and is in the red light therapy space, and I told him he should come out with a device like this. I didn't know it existed, so that's pretty cool. Why not have your lollipop, have intranasal devices, have earbud devices? You could go through other orifices, I guess, as well, but...
All right. In which case, well, there's a long... blood irradiation has been done for decades. Many 100 years, but a long time. It goes back a long time. So blood irradiation is a thing, definitely. It's obviously got risk of infection. You shouldn't do it unless you've got the right license to do that kind of thing. Hey, you don't need to do your nose and your ear. I want to say more about the nose, but you've got something like the oral cavity. There is a lot of surface area that will absorb. I also think, though, the epithelium, which is, if you like, the skin of the mouth, the epithelium is relatively transparent. And by the way, this is another thought for everybody. When somebody opens their mouth and you look inside, you see red. What does that mean? your mouth reflects red light. So when I say there's about 80%, 70-80% reflection, that's because the mouth is highly reflective. But that epithelial layer is quite good at transmitting light. So I think it rattles around and goes through. Going back to Cytochrome-C-Oxidase, two things that make me, I can't believe that Tina Carew and Margaret Riley got it wrong about Cytochrome-C-Oxidase in them. And what backs up the story from my view is that when we see oxygen consumption, so Cytochrome-C-Oxidase is the oxygen receptor for the electron transport chain. And basically, you put light into mitochondria, boom, up goes oxygen consumption. And there's all those changes in oxidative stress which come from those from the electron transport chain. So we definitely have a profound effect on the electron transport chain. It makes complete sense. It's highly likely that well, the Cytochrome-C-Oxidase is explain the rest of the story. Increased energy, reduced oxidative stress. It ought to be Cytochrome-C-Oxidase. There's something there. The fact that these clever people have not been able to catch a photon being absorbed in there.
Right.
Now, some people want to tell me that, oh, well, it's passing through and it interacts with Cytochrome-C-Oxidase. Well, if there's interaction, it should change. There's no such thing. You can't. Any interaction with something will cause a loss of some of the qualities of that photon. So, so I believe in the Cytochrome-C-Oxidase story. Just can't get the evidence I want for it.
So then when you're seeing studies that look at these wavelengths that are outside the optimal Cytochrome-C-Oxidase absorption, and you're seeing really good benefits, do you think there's something else going on here? Or do you think, hey, that wavelength is still having effects on the Cytochrome-C-Oxidase, and that is why there was a positive outcome on the study, for instance? I guess what I'm asking is, there's some people who think it's all about CCO, like as long as you're hitting that, don't worry about every other wavelength. But then I have to wonder, well, what's going on with these other studies?
There are wavelengths approaching 2,914 nanometers, nearly 3 microns.
Yeah.
Which are used for cutting of hard tissue, dentist tube.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
For which they use it because it's highly absorbed by water.
Yeah.
Okay. And these wavelengths, so these are erbium wavelengths, erbium lasers, extremely expensive. Good luck. I mean, I don't know, $100,000 of any kind, or possibly more. And they do seem to get some analgesic effect. There are some photobiomodulation-like effects from it.
Yeah.
So why is that? Well, our bodies are, 70-80% water? Water's the main chromophore. We knew water was a chromophore. I thought chromophores had colour. Water does have a colour. But we tend to think of light only from our perspective as a visual spectrum, the blue that we think. The glass, for example, doesn't let much in the way of ultraviolet light through it. So it's transparent, but not to ultraviolet light. And yes, water is transparent, but not to 2,940 nanometers. And I think there's some effect of there's water in membranes of cells. You're perturbating the cell membranes, meaning vibrating it, and it's probably changing the cell membrane permeability. It's exchanging more calcium ions, something like that.
Fascinating. Honestly, I think that fascinating, I don't know, confusing, overwhelming.
There's so much.
We'll pivot into something else. I've got a few, we don't have to go deep on this. Pulsate, pulsed light.
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to pulsed light at a reasonably low output? Or not, let's say 50 milliwatts, so quite significantly, maybe a decent amount.
A therapeutic
LEDs targeted at the body. So we're not looking at the brain, we're not looking at high-powered lasers. Is there any benefit, based on your understanding?
Targeting just the body.
Like, we're not looking at the brain here, we're just looking at the quads before a workout. Some people are saying it's good for recovery or whatever. Do you think there's any benefit?
Yes.
Really? Keen to learn more.
I was verbally told the other day, it should be published and I could probably find out where it is. So I have a PhD student who, instead of working at a pizza parlor, working his way through university, works for me.
Well,
And he says that in their experiments, and he's working in photobiomodulation in the brain, and very bright guy, and he says, hey, we've shown that when we put light on the arm, it changes blood flow in the brain.
Yep.
We've shown that when we put red light on the brain, it changes blood flow in the arm.
But there's pulsing though, right? I know
I've got to get the reference for that.
But I know they're using it for...
Oh, pulsing specifically, sorry. Pulsing. So I've been part of a study...
like, if that light was pulse,
yeah,
is it any different? Well, I know it's going to be different. There's less total joules, less total energy.
Yes, no.
No?
Not the way we do it.
Okay, so if you're pulsing and keeping that consistent...
Yeah, how do we do? First of all, it doesn't make sense to anybody.
So because I know the brain entrainment guys are big on the alpha waves, and, you know, for brain entrainment. You know, but there's products out there now that have pulsed light, pulsed photobiomodulation, pulsed red light therapy, and they're saying it's a good thing, beneficial thing. I'm curious, would you add a pulsing function to your NovoTHOR, for instance, in a new generation, in an upcoming edition?
I think if that thing's pulling a lot of current, it would knock out, I would imagine. We haven't done it. If we use a low frequency pulse, we would probably knock out somebody. Could we smooth the light, the power, the thing? I mean, you would have mean.
Forget about the engineering side of things. Is there a benefit over continuous?
So yes, there is.
Yeah.
And we've done a systematic review with Harvard on this. It wasn't clear if there was one magical wavelength. The studies were not. The quality and quantitative data wasn't sufficient to make that determination. It was clear that very high frequencies in the kilohertz range behaved exactly like a continuous beam. That's not a surprise. These lights are flickering right now, and we can't see them. So when you're in that kind of frequency range, you can't detect it. We know we start getting down to the ultrafluorescent lights of 50 or 60 hertz. Yes, you can catch the flicker in the corner of your eye, that kind of thing. So biologically, you can detect those low frequencies, and probably other cells would. And certainly in the early work with Mary Dyson, I said, from Guy's Hospital in London, that experimenting with different pulses did produce different results. So the low hundreds and all down to the tens or even really single figure hertz were having effects that were better than continuous for tissue repair. And for me, the mechanism for tissue repair is the flip side of the anti-inflammatory effect. So when inflammation's up, ATP production is down, and when you put light in the mitochondria, it flips it to the other way. If you saw in the presentation today, the production reaction species will ultimately come down. I think if you're getting better effects from pulsing in terms of tissue repair, you're probably also getting better anti-inflammatory effects. It was clear to Roberta Chow, the medical doctor in Sydney, GP, who did her PhD on the analgesic effects of photobiomodulation, that continuous beams were driving a faster analgesic response than pulse lasers.
Interesting.
So continuous beams were better for analgesia. It was a conclusion she drew from her Lancet study.
There's so much out there. So much to learn. Irradiance.
There is the internet there. We can do this on and on. And we can come back every few months and do this.
Yeah, I want to. Yeah, so much. Irradiance. Is there a minimum amount of light to achieve a benefit? A therapeutic benefit?
There are people who have done what they call ultra low.
How low is that?
Study, but this was some cells. I think this was cell studies in culture where a monolayer of cells, and so it kind of brings back the other thing I did mention: systemic effects.
Yep.
Now, what's going on with systemic effects on PDM? How does it work? I think there does seem to be some transport of it through the circulatory system, so blood. And it can be, first of all, there are a lot of platelets travel around the blood. So platelets play a big role in tissue regeneration. So so if you're activating them, are they helping go around the body and heal other things? And if you're reducing oxidative stress in the blood, I don't know. There are. I'm just trying to, if I can put something. A lot of the brain studies have quite low irradiance values.
Yeah.
Certainly not enough to get light through the hair, through the scalp, through the cranium, through the dura, get them to cortical neurons. Just don't have enough light to get there. But they are seen to be having their effects, and they're all showing improvements in blood flow.
Do you think that's blood irradiation?
Yes, but there are probably more, but possibly the effects are so fast and I say fast, they take a few minutes. Right. So as I and I whizzed through some slides earlier, I showed a study from the University of Texas, studied NovoTHOR lying in their broadband infrared spectroscopy gadgets in the forehead, and they get inside the Nova head. There with NovoTHOR, there's an immediate increase in oxidative consumption. And you see this increase in Cytochrome-C-Oxidase. Is that in the brain? I think you get something similar with just the helmets, I suspect. I mean, there is literally within the whole body and just the head in terms of sheer volume of light going in. But there are emissary veins that run from the scalp down through the sutures of the skull into the brain. Maybe that's a mechanism. Maybe there's another mechanism that causes blood flow. So there's a
thermal heating.
There are sympathetic responses as well.
Oh, right.
So you get these parasympathetic responses and blood flows.
Yeah. So could someone, I've had this question, could someone then use their Christmas decoration LEDs, got a cut on their thumb, and just use that, like 1 milliwatt centimeter squared? Is there a point where you're like, no, you need to be up around 5, 10?
If that was the only thing I had in the world, and I felt I really needed it, I would take whatever was there. I don't think there's a wasted photon, that kind of thing. It might just take a long time. I think from the point of view of a hospital trying to do treatment, you cannot have patients sitting around for an hour waiting for a beneficial effect.
Have you seen this? The RedMed app. It's a red light.
Is it? Yes, I think I've tested something like that. So that's 630 nanometers. Yeah. And it's, well, you've tested it. I presume you're going to find it's really weak.
Yes. You're better off just turning the flashlight on and using that.
Oh, good. See, I love using the flashlight suddenly because you haven't done it, but you basically see this red light, light penetrates through your finger. It just tells you, no. So that is, blue, lots of blue. We saw your spectrum earlier. I saw when you were showing me your spectrophotometer, ton of blue light. No blue light coming through your finger.
Yeah, good point.
So
okay, we'll leave that there.
We could measure that, by the way, see how much other wavelengths do.
I've got a video reviewing this app, and I do all of that. So I'll put a link to that video because otherwise we'll be here all night. Okay, what about on the other side of the spectrum? Is there a point where there's too much?
Well, obviously there's the thermal effects you don't want.
So can you explain that? What is the issue, or is there an issue here if you go too high? Is there potential thermal damage to the body? Is that what you're referring to?
First of all, there's two things to get a thermal effect. One is the power, obviously. Yeah. And the power is more precise. The NovoTHOR is, from this, let's say it's 1,000 watts of light going into your body. That 1,000 watts of light is just barely warm. But if you put that 1,000 watts of light through something the size of a pinhead, you'd soon feel it. It was even smaller. I mean, you're burning a hole inside you. You'd be burning a hole here. Now, the next thing is what is the skin color or the wavelength of light. If it was something, again, like that erbium Yagler laser I mentioned, 2,943, I think, nanometers, highly absorbed in water, literally, it'd be evaporating past my thumb. Whereas if it's 810, 1064, possibly another one, they penetrate, they go in relatively easy, scatter and diffuse. 1,000 milliwatts, probably you might feel it, depending on how small the hole, the small the beam was. But if it's smaller than a pinhead, 1,000 milliwatts, you would probably feel quite a bit of warmth there.
Your NovoTHOR puts out, what'd you say, 20, 30 milliwatts?
No, I think it's something near the 900 milliwatt range.
Sorry.
9,000. Sorry, let's get this right. Nearly a kilowatt. So there you go.
If I took my sensor in there and measured it where the body would be, what radius was it?
30 millimeters per centimeter square.
Okay, and how long is the typical treatment time? 10 minutes? 20?
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
You want to do the maths, don't you?
Yes, that's okay. We doubled that.
Yeah.
Could we double that and insert the treatment time and get the same?
Well, it's quite
just double it in half.
If you double the irradiance and you can halve the time and still have 10 and say joules per centimeter squared. So
is that better? Is it worse? Does it
therapeutically is it different?
Yes.
So more slides. Wait, so I want to do that?
Yeah. Well, this is a big question.
Right. So not enough light, no effect. More light, anti-inflammatory, regenerative effects. More light, benefits are lost. Too much light, you slow things down.
Yep.
We want to be in the therapeutic window. And by the way, the deliberate over-treatment of superficial nerves is how we get analgesia and anesthesia. We slow things down with that. So sometimes you want that effect. So in my course, I talk about these heart attacks as experiments. So Uri Oron, who does this work, wanted to find out if there's what the optimal irradiance was for watts per centimeter squared or milliwatts per centimeter squared. In this study here, he puts a parameter under it makes an incision in the rat and puts a detector under the skin. So these are very small values at 2.5 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So there'd be quite a bit more. I mean, who knows, maybe 10 times as much probably. 2.5 milliwatts per centimeter squared for 2 minutes is 0.3 of a joule per centimeter squared. He doubled the irradiance to 5 milliwatts per centimeter squared, half the irradiance to 60 seconds. It's still 0.3 of a joule per centimeter squared. Increasing the irradiance by a factor of 4, reducing the time by a factor of 4, it's still 0.3 of a joule per centimeter squared. He used the same dose 3 times. He got 3 different results.
What's on the y-axis?
So
reduction of.
This is of infarct size in the rats. So this is they've experimentally induced heart attacks in rats. And this is all part of some other experiments that he just wanted to do the dose thing. But here you see the scar tissue around the heart. Yeah. So they clamp the coronary artery, that blocks the blood flow. The rat has a heart attack. You unclamp it, you reperfuse the heart, so that's the blood going back in. You end up with something called an ischemic reperfusion injury. So when you reperfuse, the oxygen going in causes all these reactive oxygen species, and then you end up with a scar tissue as a result. Unless you're a lucky rat, in which case you've had PBM through your chest into the heart, and you can see there's less scar tissue.
Is this the only study that's looked at this particular...
this effect?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to show you another one. There ought to be more. In fact, every study ought to be looking at this to try and find what's optimal. But the message is, joules per centimetre squared are not a good guidance for effect. And as you'll see me teach in the course, I talk about PBM in the same way chefs talk about cooking. They get the oven temperature right, and they put the time right. They do not multiply them together into another number, because you can't unscramble that number then. If you said it takes, and you'll see me give a talk about a turkey, if it takes 1 million joules of heat energy to cook a turkey, then it doesn't tell if you want to do a high irradiance for a high intensity heat for a short time or a low irradiance heat for a long time. There's a speed limit to cooking, there's a speed limit to photobiomodulation. So not enough speed, or if you like, no effect. A bit more light irradiance, you get a bigger effect. If the light's going in too fast, you lose the benefit.
And you think 30 is the sweet spot for full body treatment? When
I developed NovoTHOR, I was, A, we were up against the limits of what LEDs could do at the time, and B, I was scared of exploding. When I did it, what's going to happen when I get inside this thing? There goes my arc on this thing. I'm now going to take to another one. So this is a wound healing study. 0.7 of a milliwatt per centimetre squared was not significantly different from the control. 2 milliwatts per centimetre squared, not significantly different from control. But notice, as the irradiance is going up, the time is going down. They are all 5 joules per centimetre squared. Only one combination worked, 8 milliwatts per centimetre squared for wound healing in a rat, and the 40 milliwatts per centimetre squared is gone.
If you, knowing that LEDs have become cheaper and more powerful, technology is all improving, you're designing a new version of your NovoTHOR. What do you think would the ideal figure would be? What would you use? What would you put in there, based on what you know now? Or just leave the same because it's working?
Well, it is working. I would like to experiment with more, and until we do, I don't know. And I don't know how we're going to... I think we've got to find some good, reliable biomarkers that can tell us if it's going right or wrong. I wouldn't mind doing twice the irradiance for half the time, and I wouldn't be scared of doing something awfully harmful to myself. And by the way, the thing we've got to get right here is the NovoTHOR's flat for every square centimetre of that bed is delivering that light. It's not points of light. I mean, to have 100 milliwatts per centimetre squared here and here and here,
I know,
is not the same as 100 milliwatts per centimetre everywhere. You know, ours is literally covered in light.
Yeah,
it's the whole surface. So it's so you could do spots of 100 milliwatts per centimetre squares, and I don't know, it'd be different.
It's what's happened in the last few years. These panels, like the consumer panels, have gone from 30 odd milliwatts a centimetre squared at 6 inches to we're now hitting 100.
Yeah, but they may be. I mean, have you measured some hundreds at what distances?
6 inches.
At 6 inches, okay.
I'm seeing it, like, and I'll put my hand up and say, like, I may have influenced a bit of this, because when I was testing the panels all those years ago, I mean, if there was one at 30 and there was one at 10, and they were both the same price, I was like, I'll go with the 30, right? And then, of course, people tried to put more power out there, technology's improved, now we're seeing these panels, and it's like, have we got to a point where we're overdoing it now? And this is why questions like this, because some people have been saying, and it's something Bart and I have been talking about, do we just focus on the joules? But as we can see here, and then, no, that's all right. So then what is right? Who knows? Maybe we should just all buy your beds and your pods and
because ours are professional medical devices, we're highly scrutinized. The salaries for running our business are going to be £3 million this year. Most people buying stuff from China and reselling it haven't got budgets like that to run a quality management system that meets the requirements of things. It's to be a professional medical device company is extremely expensive. You've got to be doing. You're going to be in the $10 million range to being even able to afford the team to actually allow FDA in the door.
It's why, like, even with our content, I've been very hesitant to even look at or talk about brain health effects and that, because I'm like, it's all good to say, all right, after a workout, hit the light for this long, this wavelength, because it's going to help with the recovery. But you start getting into the brain, it's a whole other world. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm conscious of the time. If someone, do you have plans to release an in-home personal use device, or is the recommendation find a clinic that's got it and do it properly?
There's two companies that have gone and run public companies, and they have both gotten into trouble. It's not a successful business to be in for this. So I'm not calling out any names, and one of them's still alive as a business. So it's clearly not a good place commercially to go. There's a lot of competition, and it's everybody burning their money that they've, it's very nice for a venture-funded business to come out and release a product and burn all their cash marketing and selling at a low price of people and then just disappearing. I mean, I don't know if you have to ask you, have any companies disappeared?
Heaps.
Yeah.
There's lots of legal cases.
Why are they disappearing?
I won't get into the reasons. Maybe off camera.
Okay.
But no, so do you have any plans to create a product that I can buy for $5,000 or $2,000 and use at home?
You're not my goal. No, my goal is all about, I'm trying to deal with the hard medical problems.
So then you'd rather I go to a clinic that has your products and has people that have been trained in your products? Like I'm the end user. You're not selling to me. You're selling to me.
If you make enough money, you can buy our products. But it's not.
It'd be a great review.
But it wouldn't be.
No,
we're not aiming at home use. We are aiming at hospitals.
Yep, got it. That's cool. Couple of quick fire questions then. Your personal protocol. What do you do? Red light therapy.
Every morning for 20 minutes. I've got time.
On the NovoTHOR.
On the NovoTHOR. If I don't have time, maybe so I've got the NovoTHOR at home. I've got a helmet at the office, which is still experimental, which I use, and it seems to keep my hair color going. I tell you, my hairdresser cannot believe my hair.
Yeah.
I've got less grey hair than I used to have, and it seems to stand on my head.
What do you do when you're traveling? You're away for 2 weeks.
I can get, when I'm in the States, it's not too hard. There's often a NovoTHOR center I can get into. But you know what? There's a lot of cumulative benefit for me. It's that when you're not getting fatigued, it's easy to exercise more and just generally getting stronger. And it doesn't disappear overnight. And I can be gone for a week. And I keep up my exercise routine. I don't have a great formal exercise routine, but I make sure I get plenty of vigorous steps in, take stairs everywhere. And with this heavy backpack I carry, where that's my gym, really.
What lies ahead for the company?
Primarily getting procedural codes and reimbursement codes. So you really know you've made your first really big dent in healthcare when the hospital system, in our case, the National Health Service in the UK, give you a procedure code and they give a reimbursement code. Not that patients don't pay money, but in the back office of our National Health Service, there is money, there is accountancy going on. So we haven't got those for anything yet. We think we're on the brink of getting that for the treatment of oral mucositis. This is a side effect of high-dose chemotherapy and radiotherapy. So that'll be our first one. We need to get our first one in America. So you go to the American Medical Association for that, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. You are a fringe medicine until you really get procedure codes and reimbursement codes. So that's it. I'm all about hardcore mainstream medicine, difficult diseases, treating things nobody else can treat. I don't need to compete with light panels.
Where can people find more about you, your courses, and your company? So
thorlaser.com, and when you get there, if you're in the United States, you'll be directed to a very tame website which has very little in it because we stay within the rules of the FDA. But if you choose the option with any other country, then you can get into the old website, which has got you links to all of our training courses. And we have 1-hour webinars and we have 8-hour training courses.
Very good. And I'll put links to everything below. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, that is a wrap. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I was feeling almost a little overwhelmed from the content that James provided. Partly because I was hoping to get some clarity. Instead, I feel like I had more questions as a result of this conversation. But I have some good news, and I'll share that with you shortly. I do just want to mention that I'll put links to everything we talked about below. If you do want to learn more about the THOR products or THOR laser, again, I'll put links below, or you can reach out to me as well, and I can do an introduction. James is also organizing a photobiomodulation event for 2024 in the UK. I'll put a link to that event below. Otherwise, you can head to pbm2024.com. I personally will be there, so yeah, add it to your calendar, look at booking hotels and flights, and we can meet up in London. That would be pretty neat. And finally, James and I spoke at length after this recorded conversation, and he did admit that he was rather impressed. I turned up to our call and I showed him the spectrometer and how I was doing some testing, and straight away he said, wow, okay, this is kind of cool. You know, this guy obviously has a bit of a passion for this topic. But he told me, you know what? There were quite a few topics here that he would have liked to have gone a lot deeper into, but we didn't have the time. So he said to me, look, if you want to sit down and do some 20-30 minute targeted videos on various topics, whether it's dosing, pulsing, skin reflection, absorption, systemic benefits, anything like that, yeah, we can do it. He said, just let me know the topic beforehand. He'll create some slides on the topic, put together a bit of a presentation, and him and I can sit down, go through it, and of course, share it with you guys. So how cool is that? It's something I'm super excited to do. And if it excites you, then hey, I've got 2 requests. Firstly, leave what topic you'd like me to discuss with James below. Just put it in the comments section. And secondly, be sure to subscribe, because if you subscribe, then hey, you're going to be the first to hear about this content when it goes live. But also it shows me that, yeah, enough people are interested, so I should do it. So that is really, really cool and something I'm looking forward to doing. Finally, I've personally involved Bart and myself in an upcoming THOR laser course. One of these is held in the UK. The one I'll go to is actually held here in New Zealand. That'll be later on in 2023. I'll be sure to do a review and provide some feedback on that course. But if you want to go to that, again, links are all below. In the meantime, while I was in London, I actually did a bunch of interviews. You can check one of them out here. I sat down with various experts and founders in the red light therapy space, and we discussed all things red light therapy, the science behind it, and also what they're working on in terms of products.